Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences. He'll spend his entire life behind bars, effectively tying up the Idaho 4 quadruple murder case. But do you feel like there was a resolution? No, it's important that the families get justice. It's important that we honor the victims. I want to be honest and say that I can't help but just want to know why. And I am sure there are a lot of you who feel the same way, whether or not you were, die hard, Bryan Kohberger did it, or die hard, he's innocent, he's being framed. It's hard to have these cases that really feel like they violate our sense of safety. To have 4 young people attacked in an off-campus home when they're just going about their lives in a rural part of America, at the start of their lives, it's upsetting. I want to go through, I thought a lot about how to make this video or what kind of video I was going to make. Obviously, when Bryan Kohberger took his plea deal, it shocked a lot of us. And it was interesting to have to reconcile with my own sense of this evidence feels weird. It seems like there's something else going on with the idea that you are innocent until proven guilty. And in this case, it's not exactly proven in a court of law. It's admitted to a judge when offered a plea deal. But we have to move forward. So rather than go through the victim impact statements, there's nothing I could say that would really do justice, and I think the family statements stand on their own. Maybe I'll add a couple clips in here. I will say Kaylee's dad turning the podium, I think, was really powerful, and I commend all of them on going through the last 2 years and for really advocating for their loved ones. It would be something I think would be awful for anyone to endure. I want to talk more about law enforcement and the prosecution. They did about an hour-long press conference after the sentence was official, and I think that's where I like to keep my focus, because obviously I just don't know that going over the heartbreaking statements is going to do anyone any good. But with all of these cases, I like to think that it can give everyone a chance to get better. It gives defense attorneys a chance to be better for their clients, which is a vital part of the justice system. It gives prosecutors a chance to hone their skills, and it gives law enforcement something to look at, a case study, so that they can potentially get better. Hopefully none of them ever have to deal with anything like this again, but horrible things happen, and the best you can do is learn from them. So let's talk about some of the standout moments for me during this press conference. Probably some of you can already predict this, but the big takeaway is how much is still unknown. It was very interesting to watch the officers from the agencies that worked on this case, as well as the prosecutors, be pressed by journalists for more specifics. I mean, for so much of the time, this case was under a gag order, and now the gag order is lifted. There are some things, they said haven't been unsealed, or they'll keep private to maintain the victim's privacy or the families. But for the most part, they are more free than they ever have been to discuss this, and they cannot tell you anything. It just makes me wonder what trial would have been like. So initially there was a question about what was the reason, and the answer was, we don't know.
Chief, from the very beginning, your department was saying this was a targeted attack. Can you now say who was the target and what's your evidence to show that?
I'll turn that question over to the investigators to answer that one.
Well, I think Darren and I have, the evidence suggests that there was a reason that this particular house was chosen. What that reason is, we don't know. We don't know who the target was, and we're not going to speculate on that up here today. But we can tell you that for whatever reason, Mr. Kohberger chose that residence. Perhaps it's the location, layout, we don't know. But that's, to the best of my knowledge, that's what that statement likely led to.
After that, a journalist asked if there was any idea of where the clothes Bryan Kohberger had worn or the weapon had gone, and prosecutors had to say no. They also seemed to dismiss the idea that there was a second weapon. I know there's been some discrepancy about that. But when asked if they could say where these critical pieces of evidence were, they said, we've got nothing.
Curious as to where you think or believe the murder weapon is, where you think or believe the clothes Kohberger was wearing that night are, and how do you think he avoided forensics at the scene?
Well, I can just tell you, and forgive us if we go back and forth, it's just kind of how we roll. But there is no evidence that we found that would lead us to any specific, even general location as to where the murder weapon or the clothes have been. And we searched. I mean, the FBI, again, to their credit, we had folks doing soil samples and so all sorts of things to try to come up with somewhere to start searching for these things, and we just never found it. As far as the forensics piece, I'll let Darren speak to
Yeah,
that.
and on the weapon, it wasn't a lack of trying. Everywhere that we had evidence of where he went, based upon phone records, based upon the evidence that we had gathered, we searched that. We went there. We did searches on the ground, in the water. We did searches. We sent soil samples to try to figure out maybe where a shovel had been used. So we searched everywhere that we possibly could, but the reality is we're looking for a singular small, it's not that small, but K-bar knife, and that's it. So it's endless of where it could have been, and we just were not able to find it. So
Another question that really stood out to me, and I think this plagued a lot of people, was the question, did Bryan Kohberger have any social media connection to the victims? Because this was something you saw presented kind of time and time again in the Amazon Prime theories. It was sort of implied in the Dateline episode, some of the books that came out. There was this argument that he had been stalking the victims, and it seems by everything we got from the prosecution that he has no link to them. He wasn't following any of them on social media. There's not a DM. I remember that being sort of a theory in the very beginning, that he, had been obsessed with one of the girls. And it does not seem like there is any evidence that there is a connection like that.
Greg Fisher with CBS News 48 Hours. Was there any evidence that Kohberger was following the social media of any of the victims?
So, trust us, we wanted that to be the case. We've looked for a link, and we have not found one. Not one.
yeah, through the entire investigation, I think that's something that we need, that you want, is to help to understand this and say, well, what's the connection? What was the link? And so we had every resource possible, and we worked that tirelessly, both from everything from his side, but all the victims and all the members of the house from their side. So we have never, to this date, found a single connection between him and any of the 4 victims or the 2 surviving roommates.
The prosecution and officers were also asked about a motive, and they had to say, we don't have a motive.
Michael Ruiz from Fox News Digital. My question's for the investigators. You guys are going through this case. You got a lot of evidence about his background, his education, his training. You said earlier you couldn't identify a reason the house was targeted. Do you have a motive for this?
We don't.
I think the prosecutor did a pretty good job of explaining that to go to trial, they didn't actually need, it's not in the law that you have to prove a motive, but I think logically a lot of people can expect that a jury would have a hard time wrapping their head around convicting someone to a capital punishment. Like, this was a death penalty case, if you can't explain why this person did this. The prosecution doesn't technically have to, but it's unsatisfactory to a jury, and it makes me wonder, had this gone to trial, would this have been an issue, that they could not find a motive for this attack, especially when there had been no way to link Bryan Kohberger to it?
I'm just wondering, did the lack of knowing the reason or the motive concern you when prepping for trial? Because juries tend to want to explore the motive or reason for a crime. And also, how do you as investigators and attorneys grapple with that? Because if you can't rationalize something irrational, then how do you continue knowing that you won't get an answer?
Well, I'll tell you, from an investigator standpoint, we already know and realize we often don't get to know that. We want it. We all do. We naturally want that. But the reality is, it's not something that we have to have or that we get. And the reality also is that oftentimes those very things that you're asking about, they're only known to one person. It's the person that commits those crimes. And I think that's probably what we have here.
And I would add that going through this whole investigation, I'd probably say it's easier than it was for Bill's offices. We were focused on a task. We had a task to do, and it was discovering evidence and interviewing folks and that sort of thing. So the motive necessarily doesn't play a part in that, right? Obviously it can, but we were just focused on getting the job done in the correct way as best we could. So,
and from the prosecutor's point of view, yeah, certainly lack of a clear motive is something that we think about and consider as we're preparing for trial, because we're going to have a jury of 12, ordinary, honest citizens there who are wanting to figure this thing out. But we also, and I've also found that juries tend to follow the law. And even jurors who come in with strong feelings, they tend to follow the law that the judge gives. And there is no element of motive in Idaho law for murder. And so we set that aside as something that we were going to dwell on, whether there was clear proof of a specific motive, because we knew it wasn't legally required. And practically speaking, we knew it wasn't something that we possessed that we could give to the jury without speculating. And I'm sure as heck not going to stand in front of a bunch of 12 jurors and start speculating. We're going to give them the evidence. And the evidence in this case, what you heard at the time of his guilty plea back on the 2nd, that evidence was compelling, and it showed his guilt without having to worry about motive in a human sense. Thank you for the question.
They were also asked by a journalist about this theory that's sort of been posited again by some of these online series that have come out, that came out before well, one of them came out right after the plea deal went in, but it was being teased before, so all of it was recorded before the plea deal, and before he changed his plea to guilty. There was a couple different series that speculated that Bryan Kohberger had gone to the Mad Greek, which had a vegan menu. He was a vegan, or is a vegan, I guess, and that was where he met Maddie, because she worked there, so did one of the other roommates, and became obsessed with her, and that's where this came from. But again, no social media link. They talked about the fact that he would clear his phone and he used a VPN. So hypothetically, if he was like searching them, maybe that's what it is. To me, it sounds kind of like a normal thing to do, to use a VPN. But they were asked specifically by a journalist about this Mad Greek connection, and there's no evidence that ever puts him at that restaurant. So I guess, but again, like these things that all of the public and all of these people who wrote books and came up with these series relied on just do not link Kohberger to these 4 young people. He pled guilty, so he did it, but it really seems like it would have been very difficult to present to a jury.
It was stated earlier that the target is unknown. However, it's been speculated that the convicted may have encountered Maddie while she was serving at the Mad Greek restaurant due to the vegan menu options. When digital data was analyzed, were there any location pins or any information there that could have connected him to where Maddie worked?
No, there wasn't. Like I said earlier, we wanted that. We looked for it in every possible way, digitally, financially, physical location, anything you could think of, anything that we thought, where is the connection, where's the overlap, and we searched tirelessly and never found it.
Was at that restaurant.
I can't say that he was never there at all, but we never found any evidence at all from interviewing everybody that we possibly could, talking to every person that would have that information to be able to show that he was there or that there was a connection through the restaurant.
I appreciated that Prosecutor Bill Thompson did go out of his way to clarify that when they talk about previous records from Bryan Kohberger being sealed, that there wasn't any indication that he had a history of violent crime or anything that would have led up to this. Similarly, I was appreciative that the prosecution clarified that there was not a sexual component to the crime during the entering of the change of plea. It doesn't make the crime less awful, and it doesn't make Bryan Kohberger less of a strange case. But I think, again, with the idea that he had been sort of pre-convicted in the media, it seemed like that was sort of the narrative, that he was a creepy stalker or someone who was desperate to become a famous killer or something like that, and that was why he did this. He had no history of violent crime, and there was not a sexual component, as implied by some of these movies or docuseries produced by major media outlets, which really I think could have potentially given him grounds to ask for a mistrial, or if he was convicted, to plea. He has given up his right to a plea. But again, Bill Thompson clarified that nothing indicates that he is a budding serial killer or was a previous violent attacker.
Just so there's no speculation here by what Detective Payne just said, documents under seal involving Mr. Kohberger's background, they may or may not be released down the road. I can tell you that there is no evidence of any criminal history of any significant nature. There was no evidence of a history of violence. There was no evidence of a history of a factual predisposition to do the crimes that he committed here. So if there are any concerns among your listeners or readers that somehow he was a serial killer in waiting with all of these prior actions, we are not aware of any behaviors like that that preceded what happened here in Idaho.
And the last thing I want to end on was this question posed by a journalist who asked, would you have caught Bryan Kohberger if it hadn't been for the knife sheath? The knife sheath had touch DNA that was identified in a way that I know a lot of people had questions about to Bryan Kohberger, at least to a relation of Bryan Kohberger's dad. And he was ultimately identified and became the primary suspect through that. You hear, I'll play the clip, they say, yes, we believe we would have found him through his car, his Hyundai Elantra. That's how we would have identified him. He always would have been caught. But we will actually never know. And I don't know if that will be the resolution people want, but they maintain they would have been okay without the knife sheath. It was the car that would have backed them up, and they had both of these pieces of evidence, so therefore they were confident proceeding with the investigation.
Had he not left the knife sheath behind, would you have been able to track him down?
We've talked about this ad nauseum, and the answer is yes. Through the car, most likely. We had some amazing people going truly line by line over tens of thousands of white Hyundai Elantras. So we believe we would have got to it through that avenue. The time frame for that is uncertain. It could have been a week later, could have been 2 months later. We just don't know. We would have found him. We would have found him.
There's a lot of questions in regards to that initial window. Brett and I made the decision on what that window was, even though the experts were saying there may be more years that match it. But the simple numbers that we began to look at were astronomical, of thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of these vehicles. So we chose to try to narrow it and start smaller, and then as we had to, we were going to open that up. But we both believe we would have gotten him through the car eventually.
So what do you guys think? I mean, do you feel satisfied? Are you tired of this case? What does it tell you about the criminal justice system? I think it's so important to stand by the promise of innocence until proven guilty. And I don't know that was being viably upheld by both the justice system and the media in this case. But he did ultimately change his plea and take the deal. So it looks like they got their man, and that's good. That's what we ultimately want, right? Yes, I would have loved to have gone to the trial. I would have loved to hear the explanation. I wanted to hear the evidence. I wanted to know what was going on. It bothers me that they don't have any motive, that he doesn't have any connection, and that there's this very, very tight timeline where now the evidence out, you're seeing these horrible, horrible headlines about how brutally these young girls and this young man were attacked. I mean, it's looking like over 100 stabs. I feel like YouTube's going to block this video, but over 100 in less than 10, 15 minutes. I mean, the timeline on this case will just always be baffling to me. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. And obviously Bryan Kohberger has pled guilty, so he's saying it did happen. But it's just, I guess it's just part of my brain. It wants to put the puzzle pieces together, and it can't without the information. But let me know what you guys think. Like I have been saying, this case is sort of wrapped up. So I will probably not make another video unless there's a significant development. But I am interested in keeping the conversation going with you guys about true crime. You'll probably see it appear ultimately on a separate channel. I'll update you when I get there. Thanks to those of you guys who are new to my channel, who watch these videos, and to those of you who normally watch my news and other content, but who have been checking out these videos anyways. I appreciate you keeping an open mind. I appreciate your support. I hope all of you guys are having a wonderful summer, that you're staying safe with your family, and that you guys will come back later in the week and keep conversing with me in the comments about these videos. Have a wonderful day.